The night was cold, and the wind howled through the empty streets. Dim streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the wet pavement. Underneath a bus stop shelter in the middle of the city, a young homeless boy named Malik sat huddled in, his worn-out hoodie, his knees pulled close to his chest. His breath formed small, white clouds in the cold night air. At just 12 years old, Malik had already seen more hardship than most adults. After losing his parents in a tragic car accident, 2 years ago he had been left to fend for himself. With no family, no home, and no one to turn to, he wandered the streets, collecting cans and bottles to trade for a few cents at the recycling center. That evening, after a long and exhausting day, Malik found himself in Central Park, searching through trash bins for discarded soda cans. His stomach growled from hunger, but he had learned to ignore it. Just as he reached for a can near a bush, he heard a weak groan from the shadows. Startled, he turned his head toward the sound. Squinting through the darkness, he saw a man lying on the ground beneath a tree. The man, dressed in a tailored suit, was clutching his leg and sweating profusely. His face was pale, and his breaths were short and ragged. Malik hesitated for a moment, but then cautiously approached. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The man weakly turned his head and whispered hoarsely, "Snake bit me." Malik's eyes widened. His gaze quickly dropped to the man's leg, where he saw 2 small puncture wounds surrounded by swelling and redness. A few feet away, a dark-colored snake slithered away into the shadows. His heart pounded in his chest. He had once read in an old library book about snake bites and knew he had to act fast. Dropping his bag of collected cans, he ripped a strip of fabric from his already tattered sleeve and tightly tied it just above the bite to slow the venom's spread. Then, without hesitation, he leaned down and began sucking out as much venom as he could, spitting it onto the grass after each attempt. The man groaned in pain, but Malik didn't stop. He knew he had to get this stranger to a hospital. "Sir, I need to get you help. Can you stand?" The man gave a weak nod, and Malik crouched down, placing the man's arm over his small shoulders. Though he was thin and malnourished, he pushed through the weight, his legs shaking under the burden. Step by step, Malik half-carried, half-dragged the man out of the park. The streets were slick with rain, and his bare feet slipped on the pavement, but he refused to stop. He ignored the stares of a few passers-by who hesitated, but did nothing to help. After nearly a mile, the glowing red and blue lights of a hospital emergency entrance came into view. Mustering his last bit of strength, Malik stumbled toward the doors and shouted, "Help! He got bitten by a snake!" Doctors and nurses rushed out with a stretcher, lifting the man from Malik's exhausted grip. As they wheeled him inside, one of the nurses noticed the young boy, drenched, shivering, and barefoot. "Did you bring him here?" she asked, bending down to meet his eyes. Malik nodded, breathing heavily. "I just did what I could." He had no intention of staying. His job was done, and he was used to being overlooked. He turned to leave, but the nurse stopped him. "Wait, you should stay." Hours passed. Malik sat in the waiting room, rubbing his cold hands together. He didn't know why he stayed, but something told him he should. Eventually, a doctor came out and looked around before spotting Malik. "You saved that man's life," the doctor said with a smile. Before Malik could respond, a nurse led him into a private room where the man he had rescued was now awake, his face no longer pale. He looked at Malik with an expression of gratitude that the boy didn't expect. "Come here, kid," the man said. Malik hesitated but stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Malik," he said quietly. The man nodded. "Malik, do you know who I am?" Malik shook his head. The man smiled faintly. "My name is Richard Thompson. I own Thompson Industries." Malik blinked. The name sounded familiar. He had seen it on billboards downtown. This man was a millionaire, someone who lived in a world completely different from his own. Richard studied the boy. His clothes were threadbare, his feet bare, and his face thin from hunger. But despite that, the boy had saved his life without hesitation. "Do you have a home?" Richard asked. Malik lowered his gaze and shook his head. Richard exhaled slowly. He had been given a second chance at life because of this boy. And now he knew exactly what he needed to do. "How would you like to come live with me?" Malik's head snapped up. "What? What do you mean?" "I mean," Richard said, leaning forward, "I want to adopt you, give you a home, a family, a chance at something better." Malik's throat tightened. No one had ever offered him anything like that before. He had spent 2 years thinking he was invisible to the world. Now, this man, a man he had saved, was offering him everything he had ever dreamed of. Tears welled in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He looked at Richard, searching his face for any sign of pity or insincerity, but he found none. For the first time in years, Malik allowed himself to hope. And so, from that night forward, his life changed forever. No longer would he sleep on cold sidewalks or search for scraps. Instead, he had a home, a father figure, and a future filled with possibilities. The story of the homeless boy who saved a millionaire's life spread throughout the city, inspiring thousands. But to Malik, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about finally finding a place where he belonged, a future rewritten. The homeless boy who became a legend, Malik, could hardly believe it. One day he was just another nameless kid on the streets struggling to survive. The next, he was stepping into a mansion bigger than any building he had ever dared to enter. Richard Thompson, the millionaire he had saved, had not only taken him in but had also made it official. Malik was now his adopted son. At first, it felt like a dream, one he was afraid to wake up from. The soft bed, the warm meals, the clean clothes, it was all overwhelming. He was used to cold pavements, stale bread, and people looking past him like he didn't exist. But now, people noticed him. They smiled at him. They cared. Still, adjusting to this new life wasn't easy. Malik had spent 2 years surviving on the streets. Trusting people didn't come naturally, and school was a whole new battlefield. Education and growth. For the first time in his life, Malik was enrolled in a private school. The other kids had been raised with wealth, privilege, and the best education money could buy. Malik, on the other hand, had spent his nights sleeping, under bridges, and his days reading old library books when he could. He struggled at first. His math was behind, his handwriting was messy, and he didn't always understand the big words his classmates used. But Malik was nothing if not determined. He worked harder than anyone, staying up late to study, asking Richard to hire tutors, and absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Within a year, he had caught up. Within 2, he was excelling. His teachers were amazed. His classmates, who had once underestimated him, started to respect him. He wasn't just the former homeless kid anymore. He was the boy who had saved a millionaire's life and was now on the path to greatness himself. Finding his passion. Despite having access to every luxury he could ever want, Malik never forgot where he came from. While other kids spent their summers vacationing in Europe, he asked Richard to take him to volunteer at homeless shelters. He spoke with kids who reminded him of his younger self, hungry, scared, and desperate for kindness. One day, when he was 15, he met a boy named Jamal at a shelter. Jamal was only 10 and had been living on the streets for 6 months. Malik saw the same hopelessness in the boy's eyes that he had once felt. That night, Malik made a decision. He wouldn't just be another success story. He would be the one to change the lives of kids like Jamal. Harvard and beyond, by the time Malik turned 18, he had earned a full scholarship to Harvard University. Though Richard could have easily paid for his tuition, Malik wanted to prove that he could achieve it on his own. At Harvard, he majored in social work and business administration, a combination that reflected both his passion for helping others and his desire to create lasting change. While studying, he also started a nonprofit organization, Second Chances Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless youth get off the streets, receive education, and find stable homes. His foundation started small, a few shelters, a handful of volunteers, but with Richard's mentorship and Malik's relentless determination, it grew into a national movement. By the time he graduated, Second Chances Foundation had provided housing and education opportunities for over 10,000 homeless children across the United States. Returning the favor at 25, Malik became the youngest person to ever receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in social justice. Major news networks covered his story, calling him the boy who saved a millionaire, and then saved thousands more. When asked how he went from being a homeless kid to a national icon, Malik always gave the same answer: because someone gave me a chance. And now, I'm giving others the same chance. But no matter how successful he became, he never forgot the man who had given him a home. Every Sunday, without fail, he had dinner with Richard, now retired and proud beyond words. "You made me believe in something bigger than money, kid," Richard would say, watching Malik with the pride of a father. "You made me believe that one act of kindness can change the world." And it had. Malik had started life with nothing. But by the time he was 30, he had built an empire of kindness, hope, and second chances, proving to the world that where you start doesn't define where you finish.